I still remember the exact shade of burgundy she wore that evening, deep and rich like expensive wine. Her dress stretched taut over her growing belly as she slid into my seat at the head of the dining table. My chair, the one I'd occupied for 28 years of marriage dinners. She didn't even hesitate, just settled in with the confidence of someone who already owned the place, while my husband Gregory stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture so intimate, it made my wedding ring feel cold against my skin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Caroline will be joining us for all family dinners from now on, Gregory announced to our stunned children and grandchildren, his voice carrying the familiar authoritative tone that had built his architectural firm into an empire. She's carrying precious cargo, after all. His eyes never once sought mine across the room, where I stood frozen with a bowl of mashed potatoes in my hands, suddenly a stranger in my own home. What Gregory didn't know was that I'd already discovered the offshore accounts. I'd already spoken to his business partner, and I'd already made arrangements that would turn this dinner into the last act of a marriage built on quicksand. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Perhaps I should introduce myself properly. My name is Eleanor Bishop, 62 years old, former gallery curator and, until recently, what society would call a devoted wife. The kind who built her life around her husband's schedule, who entertained his clients with immaculate dinner parties, who raised 3 children largely alone while he traveled the world collecting accolades and, apparently, considerably more. It all began with reading glasses, or rather, my need for them. Age has a way of demanding concessions, and at 62, I'd finally surrendered to keeping a pair in every room of our sprawling Victorian home. That particular afternoon in March, I couldn't find the pair I usually kept in Gregory's study, so I went searching through his desk drawers, something I rarely did out of respect for his privacy. That's when I found the first phone, a sleek black device I'd never seen before, tucked beneath warranty documents for appliances we'd replaced years ago. I might have dismissed it as an old work phone if a text hadn't illuminated the screen the moment I lifted it. Doctor confirmed today. Definitely pregnant. We need to talk about your promise. My hands didn't shake, my breath didn't catch. Instead, a strange calm washed over me as decades of small inconsistencies suddenly aligned into perfect clarity. The late nights, the business, trips that extended without explanation, the growing emotional distance that I'd attributed to the natural progression of a long marriage. I placed the phone exactly as I'd found it and continued my search for reading glasses as if nothing had happened. When I finally located them on the bookshelf, I used them to read through bank statements I found in the false bottom of his desk drawer, evidence of money being siphoned systematically from our joint accounts into something called Kingfisher Holdings. When Gregory came home that evening, I greeted him with the same kiss on the cheek I'd given him every day for nearly 3 decades. I asked about his day, served the salmon he preferred on Thursdays, and listened to his complaints about city regulations delaying his newest project. I was the perfect wife, because I needed time to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Eleanor, I've invited my new executive assistant to Sunday dinner, he mentioned casually over dessert, his fork cutting precisely into the tiramisu I'd spent hours preparing. She's new to the city and could use some community, especially in her condition. Her condition? I asked, keeping my voice light. She's expecting. Husband's not in the picture anymore. He didn't meet my eyes as he said it, focusing instead on brushing an invisible crumb from his sleeve. I've taken her under my wing professionally. Brilliant mind for design. Reminds me of myself at that age. I nodded pleasantly. How thoughtful of you. I'll set an extra place. Over the next few days, I moved with purpose. First, I visited James Harrington, Gregory's business partner of 30 years and my friend since college. I chose a public cafe for our meeting, ordered a chamomile tea to steady my nerves, and placed the copies of the bank statements on the table between us. "I need to know what Kingfisher Holdings is, James," I said quietly, watching his face drain of color as he recognized the documents. "And I need the truth." James's fingers trembled slightly as he pushed the papers back toward me. "Eleanor, I thought you knew. Gregory told everyone you were a silent partner in the decision." "What decision?" He looked pained. "To create a separate corporate entity for certain international projects where the permitting might be complicated if directly associated with the main firm." "You mean illegal projects," I translated flatly. James didn't deny it. "The Taipei development alone is worth 50 million, Singapore another 30. These are signature buildings that will define Gregory's legacy. Buildings constructed through bribes and shortcuts," I said, the pieces fitting together. Gregory had always been ambitious, but I never imagined he would cross ethical lines so boldly. "And how long has Caroline been involved?" James's surprise was genuine. "The new assistant? She just started 3 months ago." He hesitated, though Gregory did pull strings to get her expedited work visas for the Asian projects, unusual for someone so junior. That night, I accessed Gregory's email. After 30 years of marriage, I knew all his passwords, combinations of our children's birthdays that he thought were clever. What I found confirmed everything. Caroline wasn't just any assistant. She had been strategically hired from a rival firm because of her connections to certain officials in Southeast Asia. And she was definitely pregnant with Gregory's child. Most revealing was an email thread discussing a prenuptial agreement, not with me, but a planned one with Caroline. Gregory was preparing to leave me, but only after the Kingfisher properties were safely established and profitable. I was being strung along until the timing was financially optimal. I sat in the dark study until dawn, scrolling through years of deception. There were secret properties purchased in Caroline's name, plans for retirement that never included me, and most, painfully, evidence that this wasn't Gregory's first affair, just the first with consequences he couldn't ignore. When the sun rose, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Diane Thornton, the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state. The second was to my old college friend who now headed the Securities and Exchange Commission's regional office. The third was to our family doctor, confirming an appointment I'd been postponing. Then I began preparing Sunday dinner as if it were any other family gathering. I polished the silver that had been my grandmother's wedding gift. I arranged fresh flowers in the centerpiece. I prepared Gregory's favorite beef Wellington, roasted fingerling potatoes, and Haricott's verts with the almond garnish he preferred. Everything needed to be perfect. Our children arrived first, Michael with his wife Sophia and their twins, Rebecca with her husband David, and our youngest Ethan, still single and working his way through medical school. They filled the house with the comfortable noise of family, catching up on each other's lives while helping set the table and uncork wine. "Dad said he's bringing someone from work?" Rebecca asked, arranging water glasses. "That's new. He never mixes business with family dinner." I smiled calmly. "Yes, his new assistant. Apparently she's pregnant and could use some support." Michael raised an eyebrow. "That's unusually humanitarian of Dad." Before I could respond, the front door opened, and Gregory's distinctive footsteps sounded in the hallway. Beside him walked a young woman, no more than 35, with glossy dark hair and the confident posture of someone accustomed to making an impression. Her pregnancy was visible, but not yet unwieldy, perhaps 5 months along. I'd seen her photo in the email threads, but was still struck by how beautiful she was in person. "Everyone," Gregory announced with unusual enthusiasm. "This is Caroline. Chen, my executive assistant and the future of Bishop architecture. Caroline, my family." Introductions were made, drinks were poured, sparkling water for Caroline, and we all moved toward the dining room. That's when it happened, the moment that crystallized everything. Instead of taking one of the side chairs, always reserved for guests, Caroline walked directly to my chair at the head of the table opposite Gregory's. Without hesitation, she sat down, arranging her napkin in her lap as if she belonged there. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A hush fell over the room. Even Gregory looked momentarily caught off guard, though he recovered quickly. "Caroline's been reviewing the Kingfisher portfolios," he said, as if that explained everything. "She has an excellent eye for detail." I remained standing, the bowl of mashed potatoes still in my hands, and surveyed the scene, my children's confused faces, Gregory's nervous authority, Caroline's calculated serenity. Then I did something that surprised everyone, perhaps most of all myself. I smiled. "Perfect timing," I said warmly, setting down the potatoes. "I have an announcement to make, and now everyone's here to hear it at once." Gregory's eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't in his script. "Eleanor, perhaps we should serve dinner first. You know how Michael gets when his food gets cold." "This will only take a moment," I replied, reaching for my purse hanging on the back of another chair. I removed a folder and held it, but didn't open it. I wanted to share some exciting news about the family's future. Every eye in the room was fixed on me now. Caroline shifted uncomfortably in my chair. "As you all know, I've been managing the family trust since your grandmother passed away," I began, looking at each of my children. What they didn't know, what even Gregory didn't fully comprehend, was that my family's money had always remained separate from our joint finances, protected by the trust structure my father, a financial advisor, had insisted upon before our marriage. Gregory's architecture practice had flourished, and we'd lived primarily on his income. My inheritance had grown quietly in the background, managed by the same investment firm that had worked with my family for generations. Gregory had always been strangely uninterested in these details, preferring to focus on his own empire building. "What you may not know," I continued, opening the folder, "is that I've been working with the Lawson Foundation to establish a new arts education program that will serve underprivileged children across the state. Today, I finalized my commitment of $15 million to launch the initiative." Gasps circled the table. Gregory's face darkened. "Eleanor, we never discussed this. That's an enormous sum to commit without consultation." I turned to him, my smile unwavering. "About the same amount as the down payment on the Taipei project, isn't it? Or should I say, Kingfisher Holdings Taipei project?" The color drained from his face. Caroline's hand moved protectively to her stomach. "Mom, what's going on?" Ethan asked, looking between us with concern. "Just clearing the air before dinner," I said lightly. "There's more. I've also decided to dissolve my position as silent partner in Bishop Architecture, effective immediately. My 23% ownership will be divided equally among the three of you," I nodded to my children, "to do with as you see fit." Gregory stood abruptly, his napkin falling to the floor. "You can't do that without my approval." "Actually, I can," I said, removing another document from the folder. "According to the partnership agreement you signed when you needed my family's investment to start the firm." Section 12, paragraph 3. I had my lawyer highlight it for clarity. The room had grown so quiet you could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Caroline looked like she wanted to disappear. "Now," I said, tucking the papers away, "shall we eat before everything gets cold? Caroline, there's a lovely seat next to Ethan that I think would be more comfortable for you. This chair has terrible lumbar support, something I've been meaning to address for years." Reluctantly, Caroline rose and moved to the indicated chair. I took my rightful place at the head of the table and began serving the potatoes as if nothing unusual had happened. Inside, though, my heart was pounding. This was only the opening move in the carefully orchestrated plan I had set in motion. Throughout dinner, conversation was stilted. Gregory barely touched his food, while Caroline picked at hers nervously. My children exchanged glances, sensing the undercurrents, but not yet understanding their significance. I maintained a pleasant demeanor, asking about the twins' school projects and Rebecca's recent promotion. It wasn't until dessert, a lemon tart with fresh berries, that Gregory attempted to regain control of the situation. "While we're making announcements," he said, his voice strained but determined, "I should mention that Bishop architecture is entering an exciting new phase. The Kingfisher projects represent the future of our legacy, and Caroline has been instrumental in securing these opportunities." "How wonderful," I replied, serving a slice of tart to Michael. "Will the SEC think so too? They can be such sticklers about foreign investment disclosures." Gregory's fork clattered against his plate. Caroline's eyes widened in alarm. I continued casually. "Oh, and since we're discussing futures, I should mention I've accepted a position on the board of the National Arts Council. It will require extensive travel. I leave for Paris next week, actually. After decades of arranging my life around your schedule, Gregory, I'm looking forward to creating my own agenda." "You never mentioned any interest in board positions," Gregory said accusingly. "And you never mentioned your interest in starting a new family," I countered, finally allowing the edge to show in my voice. Yet here we are. A heavy silence fell over the table. Then Rebecca, always the quickest of our children, gasped softly. "Dad, is she—" She couldn't finish the sentence, looking between her father and Caroline with dawning horror. Gregory's face hardened. "This is not how I wanted to discuss this." "I imagine not," I agreed. "Most men prefer to control such narratives, but I've discovered I'm no longer interested in your preferred timing." Michael stood up so suddenly his chair tipped backward. "Is this why you've been canceling weekend visits with the twins? Because you've been—" He gestured wordlessly toward Caroline's pregnant belly. Caroline finally spoke, her voice smaller than her earlier confidence had suggested. "This isn't how I wanted to meet all of you. Gregory promised we would handle this more delicately." "I'm sure he promised many things," I said, feeling a flash of pity for the young woman despite everything. She wasn't the first to be drawn in by Gregory's charm and authority, though she'd certainly advanced further in his affections than previous assistants. That's rather his specialty. Ethan pushed his plate away, looking ill. "I can't believe this. Dad, how could you do this to Mom? After everything—" Gregory slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal water glasses jump. "That's enough. Eleanor is deliberately manipulating this situation. There are complexities here that none of you understand." "Actually," I said, rising from my seat with a tranquility I didn't entirely feel, "I understand perfectly. I understand that while I was caring for your mother through her dementia, you were cultivating a relationship with Caroline. I understand that while I was supporting Ethan through medical school, you were creating shell companies to hide assets. I understand that while I was building the life you claimed to want, you were planning an exit strategy." I turned to my children, whose faces reflected various stages of shock and anger. "What I want you to understand is that this situation reflects on your father's choices, not on your worth or our family's history. The love in this house was always real, even if one of its pillars turned out to be hollow." Caroline suddenly stood, one hand on her belly, the other bracing against the table. "I need to use the restroom," she mumbled, hurrying from the dining room. The sound of retching soon echoed from the hallway bathroom. Gregory rose to follow her, but I caught his arm. "Perhaps the children can help Caroline," I suggested. "You and I have other matters to discuss." Rebecca immediately went to check on Caroline, her nurturing instincts overriding her anger, at least temporarily. Michael and Ethan remained, looking lost in the wreckage of what should have been a simple family dinner. Take your plates to the kitchen, boys, I said gently. Your father and I need a few minutes alone. Once they reluctantly left, Gregory turned on me, his face contorted with rage. You've ruined everything. Do you have any idea what you've done? Illuminated the truth, I replied simply. Something you've gone to extraordinary lengths to avoid. I was going to tell you, he insisted, lowering his voice. After the Taipei project was secured, I was going to give you a generous settlement. How magnanimous of you to consider my financial needs while planning to discard 3 decades of marriage, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Did it ever occur to you that I deserved honesty? That our children deserved better than watching their father parade his pregnant mistress at a family dinner? Caroline is not a mistress, he hissed. She's carrying my child. We have a future. Together. The words struck deeper than I'd expected, despite my preparations. And what was I, Gregory? Just a convenient stepping stone, a temporary arrangement until something better came along? For the first time that evening, uncertainty flickered across his face. You know it wasn't like that. We had good years. Yes, we did, I agreed, suddenly tired. But they're behind us now. My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow. I've already moved my personal belongings to the lake house. You're welcome to stay here with Caroline if that suits your narrative better than the truth. What truth? He demanded. I met his gaze steadily. That you're leaving your wife of 28 years for your pregnant assistant. That you've been diverting company funds into questionable overseas ventures. That the great Gregory Bishop's legacy might ultimately be a cautionary tale rather than an inspiration. His face paled. You wouldn't destroy everything we've built. I'm not destroying anything, I corrected him. I'm simply stepping away from the facade. What crumbles in my absence was never truly solid to begin with. A soft knock at the doorway interrupted us. Rebecca stood there, her expression troubled. Caroline's not feeling well. I think she should lie down. Gregory immediately moved toward the door, but I spoke first. The guest room is made up. Down the hall, second door on the left. I turned to my daughter. Would you show them? I'll start clearing the dishes. Rebecca hesitated, torn between duty and the desire to continue this unprecedented family drama. Mom, are you okay? I smiled at my beautiful, compassionate daughter. I will be, I promised. This isn't the end of anything important, just the beginning of something different. After they left, I began methodically clearing the table, scraping uneaten food into the garbage and stacking plates by the sink. My hands moved through these familiar motions while my mind raced ahead to the coming days. I knew Gregory would fight the divorce terms. I knew the children would struggle with their father's betrayal. I knew Caroline would likely face a harsher reality than whatever Gregory had promised her. But I also knew something they didn't yet. I was finally free. The doctor's appointment I'd confirmed earlier wasn't just routine. It was to discuss treatment options for the early-stage breast cancer discovered during my recent mammogram. I had chosen to face that journey unburdened by Gregory's deception, surrounded instead by authentic love and support. As I rinsed the crystal glasses that had been a wedding gift nearly 3 decades ago, I caught my reflection in the window, above the sink. The lines around my eyes had deepened over the years, my once auburn hair now more silver than red. But my gaze was clearer than it had been in years, focused not on what I was losing, but on what lay ahead. Outside, the garden I'd tended for decades was showing the first signs of spring, small green shoots pushing determinedly through the soil toward sunlight. Tomorrow, I would call my sister in Paris to finalize arrangements for my visit. Next week, I would meet with the Lawson Foundation to begin work on the arts program. And in the months that followed, I would reacquaint myself with Eleanor Bishop, not as Gregory's wife or the children's mother, but as herself. The clattering of dishes in the kitchen sink was oddly comforting, a domestic soundtrack to the dismantling of my old life. Each plate represented a meal shared, a memory made, a piece of a story that was ending not with a bang, but with the quiet dignity of a woman who had finally recognized her own worth. When my children returned to the kitchen, their faces drawn, with the weight of new understanding, I was ready for them. "There's ice cream in the freezer," I said, as I had countless times throughout their childhoods. Some things, at least, remain constant. The days that followed our explosive family dinner unfolded like scenes from someone else's life. Gregory moved his things into the guest bedroom without further discussion, creating an awkward dance of avoidance throughout the house. Caroline didn't return, though I learned from Rebecca that Gregory had installed her in his downtown pied-à-terre, the apartment he'd always claimed was just for late nights at the office. The children called daily, their voices tight with concern and lingering shock. I assured them I was fine, better than fine, actually. For the first time in years, I was breathing without the weight of unacknowledged deception pressing against my chest. On Tuesday morning, I met with Diane Thornton, my divorce attorney, in her sleek downtown office. The wall behind her desk displayed framed newspaper articles documenting her most famous cases, all won, all with settlements that made wealthy men wince. "Well," she said, reviewing the documents I'd brought, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, "you've certainly done your homework, Eleanor. Most clients come to me with suspicions. You've arrived with evidence, timelines, and financial records even my investigators would envy." I smiled faintly. I've had a lifetime of organizing gallery exhibitions, charity galas, and 3 children's schedules. Documentation is second nature. She nodded approvingly. "Gregory's legal team contacted me yesterday. They're suggesting mediation." "They're hoping to contain the damage," I translated, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from my skirt. "What's your recommendation?" Diane leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. "Ordinarily, I'd say let's go for the jugular. Your evidence regarding Kingfisher Holdings alone would give us tremendous leverage, but—" She hesitated, studying me carefully. "You mentioned other priorities." "Yes." I handed her another folder, this one containing my medical records and treatment plan. Stage 1, highly treatable with surgery and radiation. But I'd rather not spend my recovery period locked in exhausting legal battles. Diane reviewed the medical information, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "I understand. We can pursue an expedited settlement, still favorable to you, of course, with specific non-negotiables. Your continued healthcare coverage through his corporate plan would be first priority. And the children's inheritance must be protected," I added firmly. "Gregory can self-destruct if he chooses, but not with their future." "Absolutely." She made several notes. "What about the lake house? Your family property, if I recall correctly." "Not part of the negotiation. The trust owns it outright." The 3-bedroom cottage on Lake Champlain had been my sanctuary since childhood. My parents had purchased it when I was 10, and some of my clearest memories were of summer afternoons spent reading on the screened porch while thunderstorms rolled across the water. "I'll be moving there permanently after my treatment." Diane raised an eyebrow. "Permanently? What about winter?" I smiled, feeling a spark of excitement despite the circumstances. "I've already contacted an architect, not from Gregory's firm, about winterizing the property. I'm thinking floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room to capture the snow-covered lake views, and perhaps a studio space for painting." "You paint?" She seemed surprised. "I used to. Before marriage, children, and becoming the perfect corporate wife." I hadn't held a paintbrush in nearly 20 years, but lately I'd been dreaming in color again. Vivid blues and purples, the particular golden light of late afternoon on water. Diane closed her notebook with a decisive snap. "I'll prepare the initial settlement proposal. In the meantime, continue documenting everything. conversations, expenses, any contact between you and Gregory or his assistant. As I stood, to leave, she added, and Eleanor? Based on what I've seen today, I have no doubt you're going to thrive beyond this divorce. Some clients never recover from the emotional impact, but you, she smiled, a rare, genuine expression on her typically strategic face. You seem to have already moved on. Had I? As I left her office and walked through the bustling downtown streets, I considered this assessment. Certainly, the initial shock and pain had been processed during those quiet nights after discovering Gregory's betrayal, before I'd confronted him. The grief had come in waves, not just for the marriage ending, but for the realization that perhaps it had never been what I believed it to be. My phone vibrated in my purse, a text from Michael. Dad called, wants to meet with all of us tomorrow night to explain. Should we go? I paused on the sidewalk, pedestrians flowing around me like water around a stone. Part of me wanted to protect my children from whatever narrative Gregory had constructed, likely one that minimized his betrayal and maximized my supposed neglect of his needs. But they were adults, capable of discernment. Your choice, I texted back. I trust you to recognize truth from fiction. Michael's response was immediate. We're on your side, Mom. Tears pricked unexpectedly behind my eyes. In all my careful planning, I hadn't anticipated how deeply I would need that simple assurance of loyalty. I blinked the moisture away and continued walking, my steps lighter. That afternoon, I had my first appointment with Dr. Patel, the oncologist who would be overseeing my treatment. Her office was warm, decorated with vibrant textiles and art that reflected her Indian heritage. She reviewed my file thoroughly before addressing me directly. Mrs. Bishop, your prognosis is quite good. The tumor is small, well-defined, and hasn't spread to lymph nodes. With surgery and targeted radiation, your 5-year survival rate is over 95%. When can we begin? I asked, already mentally adjusting my calendar. Dr. Patel seemed slightly taken aback by my directness. We could schedule surgery as early as next week, but many patients prefer to take some time to process the diagnosis, perhaps get a second opinion. I've had the second opinion, I interrupted gently. And I've done my processing. What I need now is to move forward. She nodded slowly. I understand. In that case, let's discuss the details of the lumpectomy and the radiation schedule that would follow. As she outlined the treatment plan, I took careful notes, asking questions about recovery time and potential side effects. Knowledge had always been my armor, and I was determined to face this battle fully equipped. One more thing, I said, as our appointment concluded. I'm in the process of divorcing my husband. I'd prefer that no information about my condition be shared with him. Dr. Patel's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. Of course. Your medical information is private and protected. We won't discuss it with anyone without your explicit permission. Thank you. I gathered my purse and notes, then hesitated. Doctor, would it be possible to accelerate my treatment timeline? I have plans to travel to Paris next month for a board meeting that's quite important to me. She considered this. The surgery itself is relatively straightforward, and you could potentially travel 3 weeks afterward, depending on your recovery. The radiation treatments could possibly be scheduled for when you return. She studied me with newfound curiosity. Most patients in your situation tend to cancel travel plans. I smiled. I'm discovering I'm not like most patients. Evidently not, she agreed, returning my smile. I'll see what we can arrange. When I returned home that evening, the house was silent. Gregory had left a note on the kitchen counter, a hastily scrawled message saying he'd be staying at the apartment for a few days, to give us both some space. As if space were the issue between us, rather than decades of deception culminating in a new child on the way. I crumpled the note and threw it away, then poured myself a glass of the expensive Bordeaux Gregory had been saving for a special occasion. Carrying it to my study, the one room in the house that had always been exclusively mine, I settled into my reading chair and opened my laptop. First, I emailed my sister Claire in Paris, confirming my visit for the following month and explaining that I had health matters to address before arriving, but would share details when we were together. Claire, 6 years my senior and ferociously protective, would insist on flying to my side immediately if she knew the full situation. I needed her strength, but on my terms and timing. Next, I logged into the family trust accounts, ensuring that Gregory's recent attempts to gain access, evidenced by failed login notifications, had been properly blocked by the trust administrators. I made a note to call them in the morning to add an additional layer of security. Finally, I opened a document I'd been working on intermittently, a memoir of sorts, chronicling not just the collapse of my marriage, but the rediscovery of self that had emerged from its ruins. The words flowed easily tonight, perhaps loosened by the wine or by the strange liberation that comes with having medical certainty, even when that certainty involves cancer. I wrote about the young woman I'd been before Gregory. Ambitious, creative, unafraid, the promising gallery assistant with plans for graduate study in fine arts, the daughter who'd made her parents proud with her independence and clear vision for her future. I wrote about meeting Gregory at a gallery opening, how his confidence and intensity had seemed like strength rather than the warning signs of narcissism they later proved to be. The sound of the front door opening startled me from my writing, trance. I glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. Heavy footsteps in the hallway confirmed it was Gregory, likely intoxicated based on the irregular cadence. I saved my document, closed the laptop, and waited. Sure enough, after a few minutes of bumping around in the kitchen, he appeared in the doorway of my study. His expensive suit was rumpled, his normally perfect hair disheveled. He leaned against the doorframe, regarding me with bloodshot eyes. "Writing my eulogy?" he asked, gesturing sloppily toward my laptop. "Not everything is about you, Gregory," I replied calmly, "though your narcissism would certainly make for an interesting psychological case study." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. In our decades together, I had never spoken to him with such direct criticism. I had absorbed his moods, soothed his ego, maintained the peace at all costs. That version of me had retired permanently. "The kids refused to meet with me," he said, his voice rough. "Said they'd talk when they were ready, not on my schedule. That sounds like your influence." "That sounds like adults making their own decisions," I corrected. "They're not chess pieces for either of us to move around, Gregory. They're people with their own feelings about discovering their father's double life." He pushed off from the doorframe and took an unsteady step into the room. It wasn't a double life. It was a mistake that evolved into a pregnancy, into secret financial arrangements, into plans to discard me once the timing was convenient. I closed my laptop and stood, unwilling to remain seated while he loomed over me. "Those aren't evolutions, Gregory. They're calculated decisions made repeatedly over time." His face darkened. "You're portraying me as some kind of villain." "I'm not portraying you as anything," I interrupted. "I'm finally seeing you clearly. There's a difference." He moved, further into the room, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. A rare glimpse of the vulnerability he typically kept hidden beneath layers of confident charm. "I did love you, Eleanor," he said quietly. "In the beginning." The simple past tense cut deeper than expected. "And I loved who I thought you were," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "We were both mistaken." His expression hardened again. "My lawyer says you're asking for 40% of the firm." "My stake in the company is 23%. The additional 17 represents compensation for my role in building your client network, hosting business dinners, and managing the social connections that facilitated your success. Would you prefer I itemize those contributions for the court? His laugh was bitter. Always so organized, Eleanor. So controlled. Did it ever occur to you that maybe this, he gestured between us, failed because you were too perfect? Too predictable? Too goddamn accommodating all the time? The accusation was so absurd I actually laughed. Are you suggesting I should have been less supportive? Less reliable? Would that have kept you from impregnating your assistant? He flushed dark red. That's not what You made conscious choices, Gregory, I said, my voice level but firm. Hundreds of them, over years. You chose to pursue other women. You chose to hide money. You chose to plan an exit strategy while pretending everything was normal. The failure of our marriage rests squarely on those choices, not on my supposed perfection. He slumped suddenly, the fight draining out of him. He looked older than his 64 years in that moment, the consequences of his actions finally catching up with his self-image. Caroline lost the apartment, he said unexpectedly. I frowned. What do you mean? The lease. It's in the company name. The board voted today to terminate it, effective immediately. Said it was an unnecessary expense in light of recent developments. He rubbed his face wearily. They're distancing themselves from me, from the scandal. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt a surprising flicker of concern for Caroline. Young, pregnant, and certainly not the first. Woman Gregory had misled with promises he never intended to keep. Where is she staying? I asked. Gregory looked up, confusion crossing his face. With a friend, I think. I've booked her a hotel until we sort things out. He studied me suspiciously. Why do you care? I considered the question seriously. Because, unlike you, I don't see other people as disposable once they're inconvenient. The barb landed precisely. He flinched, then straightened, his defensive armor clicking back into place. My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow about revising the settlement offer. I want the lake house. The demand was so unexpected I almost laughed again. The lake house isn't part of our marital assets. It belongs to my family trust. I've spent 30 years maintaining that property, he countered, adding the boat dock, updating the kitchen, using trust funds designated specifically for those purposes, I finished for him. You've never spent a dime of your own money on the lake house, Gregory. Check the records. His expression confirmed he hadn't expected me to know this detail. Yet another underestimation. How had I not noticed sooner how little he actually knew me? This isn't over, he muttered, turning to leave. On that point we agree, I said to his retreating back. The proceedings are just beginning. After he stumbled back down the hallway, I heard the guest room door slam. I remained standing in my study, oddly energized by the confrontation. In previous years, such an exchange would have left me anxious and drained, desperate to smooth things over and restore harmony at any cost. Now, I felt clear-headed, focused. I returned to my laptop and added a new section to my document, capturing the interaction while it was fresh. At some point, I might shape these raw notes into something more structured, perhaps the memoir I'd always secretly wanted to write. For now, it was enough to record the truth as I experienced it, without filtering it through the lens of what would please or appease others. The next morning, I woke early and dressed carefully in a dove-gray suit I'd purchased for gallery openings. Gregory was still asleep, or at least his door remained closed, when I left the house. My first appointment was with Dr. Brennan, the surgeon Dr. Patel had recommended. We can schedule the procedure for next Tuesday, he confirmed after examining me. It's minimally invasive, and most patients go home the same day. You'll need someone to drive you, of course. My daughter will help, I said confidently, though I hadn't yet told Rebecca about my diagnosis. That conversation was scheduled for lunch today. From the surgeon's office, I drove to the small French bistro where I'd arranged to meet Rebecca. She was already waiting at an outdoor table, sunglasses perched on her head, checking emails on her phone. At 32, she was a successful marketing executive with her father's drive, but, thankfully, my empathy. She looked up as I approached, her face breaking into a warm smile that faltered slightly as she registered my formal attire. "Mom?" She stood to embrace me. "You look beautiful, but awfully dressed up for lunch. Coming from somewhere important?" "Doctor's appointment," I said, returning her hug before sitting down. And yes, it was important. That's partly why I wanted to meet today. Rebecca's expression immediately shifted to concern. "Doctor, is everything okay?" I placed my hand over hers on the table. "I've been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer." Her face paled. "What? When? How?" "I found out last week, before the dinner situation. The prognosis is excellent. Small tumor, caught early. I'll have surgery next Tuesday, followed by radiation treatments." I kept my voice matter-of-fact, though my heart ached at the fear in her eyes. "Last week? Before everything with Dad and—" She broke off, visibly connecting the dots. "You were dealing with this alone while also discovering Dad's affair?" I squeezed her hand. "I wasn't alone. I had my doctors, my planning, and the clarity that sometimes comes with facing mortality, even briefly." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you tell us right away?" "I needed to understand the situation fully before sharing it. And then, with your father's revelation, I didn't want to complicate an already emotional time." I smiled gently. "Besides, I'm telling you now, and I could use your help with transportation after the surgery." She wiped away a tear, nodding, firmly. "Of course, I'll clear my schedule. I can stay with you while you recover too." "That won't be necessary. It's an outpatient procedure." I hesitated, then added, "But I would appreciate your company for the first night or two. The house feels different now." Rebecca's expression hardened. "I still can't believe Dad. The timing of all this is unbelievable. Does he know about your diagnosis?" "No, and I'd prefer to keep it that way for now." I reached for the menu, signaling a shift in conversation. "Now, shall we order? The salmon here is excellent." But Rebecca wasn't ready to move on. "Mom, seriously, you've always been the one taking care of everyone else. Let us take care of you for once." The waiter approached and I held up a finger, asking for a moment. "Sweetheart, listen to me. I don't need taking care of in the way you're thinking. What I need is support for the choices I'm making. About my health, about the divorce, about reclaiming my life. Can you understand the difference?" She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I think so. You don't want to be treated like you're fragile." "Exactly." I smiled. "Now, about that salmon." Over lunch, I outlined my treatment plan and my intention to still attend the National Arts Council board meeting in Paris the following month. Rebecca listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and only occasionally veering into what I recognized as protective daughter mode. "Have you told Aunt Claire?" she asked as we finished our coffee. "Not the details. I'll tell her in person when I see her." Rebecca set down her cup, her expression suddenly mischievous. "You know she's going to go full Claire on Dad when she finds out everything. Remember when Michael's high school girlfriend broke up with him, and Aunt Claire sent that ridiculously formal letter demanding the return of the sweater she'd knitted him?" I laughed, remembering my sister's fierce protectiveness of our family. "Your father may want to stay on this side of the Atlantic for a while once Claire is fully briefed." As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Rebecca hesitated. "Mom, there's something I should tell you. Dad called me this morning asking if I knew any reason why the board was suddenly scrutinizing all the overseas projects. He sounded worried." I carefully folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. "What did you tell him?" "That I had no idea, but that perhaps transparency is always the best policy." Her eyes met mine. Did you say something to someone? About Kingfisher? I may have had coffee with Janet Reynolds last week. Janet was on the board of Bishop Architecture and had been my friend since college, a friendship Gregory had always dismissed as just women's stuff. Rebecca's eyes widened. Mom, that's so strategic, I suggested. A slow smile spread across her face, an expression so like my own that it momentarily took my breath away. I was going to say badass, but strategic works too. After lunch, I had one more appointment, this one with Samuel Davis, the architectural consultant I'd hired to evaluate the lake house renovations. We met at a coffee shop near his office where he spread out preliminary sketches based on photos I'd sent him. The structure is sound, he confirmed, but the insulation will need a complete overhaul for year-round living. The good news is we can do it without compromising the character of the original building. I studied the drawings, particularly the plans for converting the old sleeping porch into a studio space with northern light, perfect for painting. And the timeline? If we start next month, we could have you moved in by October before the serious cold sets in. He hesitated. You mentioned wanting to be there for the fall colors. Yes. The maple trees surrounding the lake house created a breathtaking display each autumn, nature's final exuberant expression before winter's quiet. I hadn't seen it in years, always too busy with Gregory's fall client events to make the trip north. There is one other option to consider, Samuel added, sliding another sketch toward me. The boathouse could be converted into a guest cottage. It would need more extensive work, but it would provide separate accommodations for visiting. Family. I thought of my children, of Claire, of potential future grandchildren coming to visit. Let's include it in the plan. I want the lake house to be a gathering place. By the time I returned home that afternoon, I was tired but satisfied with the day's progress. Surgery scheduled, Rebecca informed, renovation plans underway, concrete steps toward the future I was building. I half expected Gregory to be gone, but his car was in the driveway. Steeling myself for another potential confrontation, I entered the house. I found him in the kitchen, staring at an open cabinet with a bewildered expression. He turned as I set my purse on the counter. "Where's the French press?" he asked, his tone accusatory. "I packed it," I replied calmly, "along with my grandmother's china and the silver tea service. They're in storage until I move to the lake house permanently." His face registered surprise, then anger. "You can't just start removing things from our home." "Our home?" I interrupted. "Yesterday you were demanding the lake house as if this one no longer mattered to you." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "That's not— I was upset. I wasn't thinking clearly." "A frequent occurrence lately," I observed, moving past him to fill the electric kettle. I could feel his eyes on me, studying the subtle changes in my demeanor, my posture, the way I occupied space without apology. "You're different," he said finally. I turned to face him, leaning against the counter. "Yes." "Since when?" The "I" question was so fundamentally misguided that I almost felt sorry for him. "I've always been this person, Gregory. You just never took the time to notice." He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps he was. After a moment, he picked up his phone from the counter. "Caroline has a doctor's appointment tomorrow, for the baby. I'll be gone most of the day." I nodded, turning back to the kettle, as it began to boil. "I'll be meeting with the estate lawyers to ensure the children's trusts are properly insulated from any financial repercussions of the divorce, in case your overseas ventures attract the wrong kind of attention." His silence confirmed that particular arrow had found its mark. When I turned around again, cup of tea in hand, he was gone. Alone in the kitchen, a space I'd designed and managed for decades to facilitate family dinners, holiday gatherings, client events, I felt a curious mixture of melancholy and anticipation. This house had been the backdrop for so much of my adult life, containing within its walls countless moments of genuine joy alongside the slow erosion of my marriage. Yet as I looked around at the gleaming countertops and carefully curated decor, I realized how much of it reflected Gregory's preferences rather than my own. The sleek modernist aesthetic had been his choice, better for entertaining clients, he'd insisted. The formal dining room where our family dinner had imploded was rarely used for actual family meals, instead serving as a showcase for Gregory's success. My phone vibrated with a text message from Claire. Just booked your return ticket for the 20th. Staying with me for a week after the board meeting, no arguments. Apartment has been freshly painted and the wine cabinet restocked. I smiled, typing back, looking forward to it. Much to tell you, but in person. Her response was immediate. Intriguing and slightly concerning. Call if you need me sooner. I set the phone down, my resolve strengthening. The path ahead would not be easy. Surgery, radiation, divorce proceedings, the emotional fallout with my children. But for the first time in decades, it was truly my path. Not one shaped by accommodating Gregory's career, preferences, or deceptions, but one determined by my own choices, needs, and rediscovered sense of self. Tomorrow, I would meet with my financial advisor to discuss reallocating investments to support my new plans. Next week, I would undergo surgery with Rebecca by my side. And in the months that followed, I would establish my independence not as Gregory Bishop's soon-to-be ex-wife, but as Eleanor Bishop, emerging from the chrysalis of a 3-decade marriage into the woman I was always meant to become. The morning of my surgery arrived with an unexpected serenity. I woke before my alarm, watching dawn's gentle light filter through the curtains, painting the ceiling with soft amber hues. For a moment, I simply breathed, acknowledging the threshold I was about to cross. From a woman with cancer to a woman fighting cancer. There's power in naming things, in facing them directly. Rebecca arrived at 6, letting herself in with her key. I heard her moving quietly in the kitchen, the familiar domestic sounds of coffee brewing and cupboards opening. By the time I descended the stairs, dressed in comfortable clothing as instructed by Dr. Brennan, she had prepared a light breakfast and was sitting at the counter scrolling through her phone. "You didn't need to cook," I said, accepting the mug of tea she offered. "I'm not supposed to eat before the procedure." "This is for me," she replied with a small smile. "Stress eating, though I don't know why I'm the nervous one when you're the one having surgery." I squeezed her hand. It's often harder to watch someone you love go through something than to go through it yourself. She looked up, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "Is that why you didn't tell us right away? About your diagnosis? Because you were protecting us?" I considered her question, wanting to be honest. Partly, but also because I needed to process it on my own terms first, to understand what it meant for me before it became about everyone else's feelings too. She nodded slowly. "That makes sense." She hesitated. "Dad called last night. He asked where I was going to be today. I didn't tell him about your surgery, but I think he suspects something's happening. The firm is requiring him to take a leave of absence while they review the Kingfisher holdings. He's not handling it well." I wasn't surprised. Gregory's identity had always been inextricably linked to his work. Without it, he would be adrift. Something I understood all too well, having centered my own identity around being his wife for so long. "He'll find his way," I said, sipping my tea. "Or he won't. Either way, it's no longer our responsibility to manage his emotions." Rebecca studied me with a new appreciation. "When did you get so wise?" "Around the same time I realized I'd been unwise for far too long," I replied with a wry smile. "Shall we go? I'd like to arrive early." The hospital was quiet at that hour, the fluorescent lights harsh against the polished floors. Rebecca remained close as we navigated the corridors to the surgical center, where a nurse greeted us with practiced efficiency. The preoperative procedures passed in a blur of forms, vital signs, and gentle questions about my medical history. When Dr. Brennan stopped by for a final consultation, his confident demeanor was reassuring. "We'll take good care of you, Mrs. Bishop," he promised, marking the surgical site with a purple marker. "The procedure should take about 2 hours, and you'll be in recovery for another hour after that. Any last questions?" I shook my head. "I'm ready." As they prepared to wheel me into the operating room, Rebecca leaned down to hug me awkwardly around the IV lines and monitoring equipment. "I'll be right here when you wake up," she whispered. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too," I replied, suddenly grateful for her presence in a way I hadn't anticipated. For someone who had prided herself on self-sufficiency, accepting support was its own kind of courage. The anesthesiologist placed a mask over my face. "Count backward from 10, he instructed. I made it to 7 before darkness enveloped me. When I woke, the world reassembled itself in fragments, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the coolness of the recovery room, the distant murmur of medical staff. I became aware of a dull ache in my chest, more pressure than pain, and the cottony dryness of my mouth. "Mrs. Bishop?" A nurse appeared beside me, adjusting something on my IV line. "Surgery went perfectly. Dr. Brennan will be by shortly to give you the details. How's your pain level on a scale of 1 to 10? 3, I murmured, my voice raspy. "Water." She helped me take small sips through a straw. "Your daughter is waiting. Would you like to see her?" I nodded, and moments later Rebecca was beside me, her face a mixture of relief and lingering concern. "Hey, fighter," she said softly, taking my hand. "You did great." Dr. Brennan arrived while Rebecca was still getting me settled, his surgical cap removed but still wearing scrubs. "Excellent news," he announced without preamble. "We got clean margins around the tumor, and the sentinel lymph node biopsy showed no signs of spread. You're officially cancer-free, though we'll still recommend the radiation as a precautionary measure." The wave of relief that washed over me was unexpected in its intensity. I'd maintained such careful control over my emotional response to the diagnosis that I hadn't fully acknowledged the fear lurking beneath my composed exterior. Cancer-free. The words seemed to shimmer in the air, precious and profound. "When can I travel?" I asked, practical concerns reasserting themselves. Dr. Brennan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Typically, I'd recommend avoiding long flights for at least 3 weeks post-surgery. Where are you planning to go?" "Paris, for a board meeting." He exchanged a glance with Rebecca, clearly recognizing the determination in my voice. "Let's see how your recovery progresses. If all goes well, you might be cleared for travel in about 2 weeks, though you'd need to be careful about lifting, luggage, and overexertion." After providing detailed aftercare instructions, Dr. Brennan left us to manage the discharge process. By early afternoon, Rebecca was helping me into her car for the drive home. The effects of the anesthesia were wearing off, leaving me tired but clear-headed enough to notice my daughter checking her phone repeatedly during the drive. "Everything okay?" I asked. She hesitated. "Michael's been texting. Apparently Dad showed up at his office this morning, pretty agitated. Wanted to know where I was, why neither of us was answering his calls." I sighed. What did Michael tell him? That we were both busy with our own lives and he should respect that. Rebecca's knuckles whitened slightly on the steering wheel. "Mom, I think Dad's spinning out. Michael said he looked terrible. Hadn't shaved, clothes rumpled, completely unlike himself." Despite everything, a flicker of concern surfaced. Gregory had always been meticulously put together, his appearance a carefully managed aspect of his professional persona. For him to appear disheveled in public, especially at our son's workplace, suggested a level of distress beyond what I'd anticipated. "Has Caroline been in contact with any of you?" I asked. Rebecca shook her head. "Not directly. But Michael heard from one of Dad's associates that she's been placed on paid leave from the firm." Apparently, the board is trying to distance themselves from the whole situation. The pragmatic part of me recognized this as a positive development. For the divorce proceedings, Gregory's position weakening, the financial entanglements becoming less complicated. But I couldn't help wondering about Caroline, pregnant and possibly isolated, her professional future suddenly uncertain. "When we get home, I'd like you to call your brothers," I said. "See if you can arrange a time for all three of you to meet with your father. Not for his sake, but for yours. You need to hear whatever he has to say, even if it's just justifications and excuses." Rebecca looked surprised. "You're encouraging us to talk to him? After everything he's done?" "I'm encouraging you to process this situation in whatever way you need to. He's still your father, regardless of what he's been to me as a husband." I gazed out the window at the familiar neighborhoods passing by. Holding on to anger only burdens the one who carries it. She was quiet for a moment. "When did you stop being angry at him?" "Who says I have?" I smiled faintly, "But I'm not letting that anger define my next chapter. There's a difference." When we arrived at the house, we were surprised to find Ethan waiting on the front steps, a duffel bag at his feet. He stood quickly as the car pulled in, his expression tense until he saw me in the passenger seat. Relief flooded his features as he hurried over to help me out of the car. "Mom, Rebecca didn't tell me. Are you okay? What happened?" His physician's training was evident in the way he immediately assessed me, noting my careful movements and the subtle bulge of bandages beneath my loose blouse. "Lumpectomy," I explained, allowing him to support my arm as we walked toward the house. "Stage 1 breast cancer, caught early. Prognosis excellent." His face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, concern, hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I'm a doctor, for God's sake. I could have helped, consulted on treatment options." "You're in residency, not oncology," I reminded him gently. "And more importantly, you're my son. I needed you as family, not as my medical consultant." Inside, Rebecca helped me settle onto the living room sofa, while Ethan brought a glass of water and my prescribed pain medication. The domestic scene might have appeared ordinary to an outside observer, a mother being cared for by her adult children, but the absence of Gregory created a palpable void, a disruption in the family constellation we were all still adjusting to. "So," I said, once I was comfortably arranged with pillows supporting my surgical site, "what brings you here today, Ethan?" "Rebecca didn't mention you were coming." My youngest shifted uncomfortably. "Dad showed up at the hospital yesterday, during my shift. He was not himself. Kept asking if I knew where you were, what you were planning. When I wouldn't tell him anything, mostly because I didn't know anything, he got agitated. Security had to escort him out." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Gregory that it made my heart ache. "I was worried he might, 'Come here, make a scene while you're recovering. Thought you might need backup.'" Rebecca and I exchanged concerned glances. Gregory's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. First Michael's office, then the hospital. It seemed the carefully constructed facade he'd maintained for decades was crumbling rapidly, revealing something volatile beneath. "Did either of you tell him about my surgery?" I asked. Both shook their heads. "Though he might have figured it out," Rebecca added. "He knows we wouldn't both take time off work simultaneously for no reason." I considered this. "We should call Michael, let him know what's happening, and perhaps alert security at your workplaces, just as a precaution. Not because I think your father would ever harm any of you," I added quickly, seeing the alarm on their faces, "but because his current state seems unpredictable." As if summoned by our conversation, the doorbell rang, its chime unusually intrusive in the quiet house. Ethan immediately stood, his posture tense. "I'll get it." Rebecca moved, closer to me on the sofa. "Should we call the police?" Let's not overreact, I cautioned, though my own pulse had quickened. It's still daylight and we're all here together. Voices in the foyer grew louder, Ethan's firm tone overlapping with another I recognized immediately. Gregory. Despite my earlier calm philosophical stance about anger, I felt a surge of it now. How dare he intrude on this day, of all days? Ethan appeared in the living room doorway, his expression tight. Dad's here. He's insisting on seeing you. I told him you're not feeling well, but he won't leave. Before I could respond, Gregory pushed past our son into the room. He looked exactly as they had described, unshaven, hair uncombed, his typically immaculate clothing wrinkled and slightly askew. But most striking was his expression, a wild-eyed desperation I'd never seen before. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse. "What's going on? Why are all the kids here? Why won't anyone tell me anything?" I straightened slightly against the pillows, wincing as the movement pulled at my stitches. "Gregory, this isn't a good time. As you can see, I'm not well." His gaze traveled from my face to the prescription bottles on the coffee table, to the way Rebecca hovered protectively beside me. Something seemed to collapse in him, his shoulders sagging. "You're sick. That's what all this has been about, isn't it? The divorce, the aggressive settlement terms. You found out you were sick and decided to punish me before—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Before I die?" I supplied calmly. "Is that what you think? That I'm exacting some final revenge?" He ran a hand over his face. "The kids suddenly taking time off work, you making all these dramatic changes, cleaning out the house. What else am I supposed to think?" I looked at my 3 children, their faces tight with anger on my behalf, then back to Gregory. "I had surgery this morning. Early-stage breast cancer, now removed. The prognosis is excellent." I kept my voice level, factual. "My illness has nothing to do with the divorce. That decision was made when I discovered your affair, your financial deceptions, and your plans to leave me once it was convenient for you." He flinched. "I never planned—" "Please don't lie," I interrupted gently. "I've read the emails, Gregory. I've seen the prenuptial agreement you were drafting for Caroline. I know about the property purchases, the offshore accounts. I know everything." The color drained from his face. "How?" "You've always underestimated me," I said simply. "You assumed I was as incurious about your life as you were about mine. You were wrong." He took an unsteady step forward, stopping when Ethan moved protectively beside the sofa. "Eleanor, we need to talk privately. About Caroline. About the pregnancy. There are things you don't understand." "Dad," Rebecca interjected firmly, "Mom just had surgery. She needs rest, not stress. Whatever you have to say can wait." Gregory ignored her, his eyes fixed on me. "The baby isn't mine." The statement hung in the air, its implications slowly registering. I studied his face, looking for the tells I'd learned to recognize over decades of marriage. He was lying, or at least not telling the complete truth. "Caroline was already pregnant when she came to work for me," he continued, words tumbling. "Out now. Her ex-husband left her when he found out. She was desperate, about to lose her work visa. I was trying to help her." "By having an affair with her?" Ethan asked skeptically. "By planning to divorce Mom and marry her instead? That's a pretty extreme form of help, Dad." Gregory's face flushed. "It's complicated. I care about Caroline, yes. But the baby, it was never mine. I let people assume because it protected her reputation, gave her more security at the firm." I remained silent, processing this new information. Whether the baby was biologically his or not seemed almost irrelevant now. The deception, the financial maneuvers, the emotional betrayal, those remained unchanged. "Why are you telling me this now?" I finally asked. He met my gaze directly for the first time. "Because I thought you were dying. Because despite everything, I couldn't bear the thought of you leaving this world believing I had replaced our family so easily. His voice broke slightly. 30 years, Eleanor. That has to count for something. I felt a complex surge of emotions, pity, lingering anger, and a strange sense of closure. It counted for something, I agreed quietly. Just not enough. To keep you faithful or honest. He flinched as if I'd struck him. What can I do? He asked, his voice barely audible. To fix this? Nothing, I replied simply. Some things, once broken, can't be repaired. They can only be acknowledged and released. I shifted slightly, the discomfort from my surgery making itself known again. I need to rest now, Gregory. Please respect that. For a moment, he seemed about to argue further, but something in my expression must have reached him. He nodded once, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I'll go. But Eleanor, he hesitated. I am sorry, for whatever that's worth. After he left, escorted to the door by a stern-faced Ethan, an unexpected quiet settled over the room. Rebecca squeezed my hand gently. Do you believe him? About the baby? I considered the question. I believe he believes it matters. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant to me now. I smiled faintly at my children's concerned faces. What I'd really like is a cup of tea and perhaps one of those pain pills. Surgery is exhausting business. The next few days passed in a gentle rhythm of recovery. Rebecca stayed over that first night, sleeping in her old bedroom. Ethan took the next shift, his medical training making him an attentive caregiver, anticipating my needs often before I recognized them myself. Michael and his wife stopped by daily, bringing carefully prepared meals and updates from the outside world. In this cocoon of family care, news still filtered in. Gregory had taken a formal leave of absence from the firm, pending investigation, into the Kingfisher Holdings. Caroline had apparently left town, returning to Singapore according to office rumors. The divorce proceedings continued through our respective lawyers, with Gregory suddenly more amenable to my terms than before. On the third day post-surgery, Janet Reynolds, my friend and Gregory's board member, came to visit, bringing fresh flowers and insider information. The firm has engaged forensic accountants, she reported, settling into an armchair with a cup of tea. They've already identified several irregularities in the offshore accounts. Gregory's looking at potential SEC violations, possibly criminal, charges if certain allegations prove true. I frowned. That seems extreme. Gregory bent rules, certainly, but outright fraud doesn't align with what I know of him. Janet studied me curiously. After everything he's done, you're still defending him? Not defending, I clarified. Just contextualizing. Gregory was always ambitious, sometimes ruthlessly so. But calculated criminality? That would require more patience and strategic thinking than he typically employed. She nodded slowly. Well, the investigation continues. In the meantime, how are you feeling? Surgery recovery going well? Better than expected, I confirmed. Dr. Brennan is pleased with the healing. I should be cleared for my Paris trip, though with some limitations on activity. Janet set down her teacup. Paris? You're still planning to go through with that? Eleanor, you've just had cancer surgery, your marriage is ending, your husband might be facing criminal charges. Don't. You think it might be wise to postpone? I smiled, recognizing the concern behind her words. Janet, for 30 years I've arranged my schedule around Gregory's needs, the children's activities, the firm's social calendar. This trip, this board position, is the first thing I've done solely for myself in decades. I won't postpone it, especially now. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. Just promise you'll take it easy. Europe will still be there if you need more recovery time. After Janet left, I carefully made my way upstairs to the bedroom I'd shared with Gregory for most of our marriage. Since the family dinner, revelation. He'd been sleeping in the guest room, and after his dramatic appearance post-surgery, he hadn't returned to the house at all. The room felt different now, not just because of his absence, but because of my changing relationship to the space. I surveyed the furnishings with fresh eyes. The heavy mahogany furniture had been Gregory's choice, as had the subdued color palette. My own preferences, for lighter woods, for touches of vibrant color, had been consistently overruled in the name of resale value and appropriate executive styling. How strange that I'd never questioned these decisions, accepting his aesthetic, authority as somehow superior to my own instincts. Moving to my closet, I began selecting items for my Paris trip, creating small piles on the bed. Conservative business attire for the board meeting, comfortable yet stylish pieces for exploring the city with Claire. A few evening options for the dinners she'd inevitably arrange. My sister's passion for fine dining was legendary in our family. As I worked, a strange lightness filled me. Despite the physical discomfort of my healing surgical site, despite the emotional complexity of the past weeks, I felt more myself than I had in years. It was as if layers of accommodation and compromise were being shed, revealing the woman who had always existed beneath the careful construct of Mrs. Gregory Bishop. That evening, as I sat in my study reviewing documents for the divorce proceedings, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Bishop." A woman's voice, slightly accented. "This is Caroline Chen." My breath caught. "Caroline, this is unexpected." "I know." Her voice was tentative, lacking the confidence she'd displayed at that fateful dinner. I wanted to apologize, and to explain, if you'll let me." I leaned back in my chair, considering. Part of me wanted to simply hang up, to maintain the clear boundary between us, but another part, the part that had been reflecting on authenticity and truth, was curious. "I'm listening," I said finally. She exhaled audibly. "First, I want you to know that Gregory never promised to leave you for me. That was my fantasy, not reality. He made it clear from the beginning that what we had was separate from his marriage. How noble of him," I couldn't help commenting dryly. "I deserved that," she acknowledged. "The truth is, I pursued him. I'd researched his firm before applying for the position. I knew exactly who he was, who you were. I had this idea that if I could just get close enough, make myself invaluable professionally and personally." She trailed off. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "What do you hope to achieve?" There was a pause. Clarity, I suppose. For both of us. "Gregory told me about your surgery. I'm sorry for what you're going through." I felt a flicker of annoyance. Gregory had no right to share my medical information with you or anyone else. "You're right," she said quickly. "He shouldn't have. But Mrs. Bishop, Eleanor, I need you to know that the baby isn't his." The same claim Gregory had made. So he said. Yet you allowed him to act as if it were, to use your pregnancy as leverage within the firm, to plan a future together. "It was wrong," she admitted. "A lie that spiraled. I was desperate when I came to Bishop Architecture, pregnant, abandoned, by my husband, about to lose my work authorization. Gregory offered protection, stability. I convinced myself the deception was justified. Despite myself, I felt a stirring of empathy. The power dynamics between a young foreign employee and her influential boss were inherently unbalanced. Gregory had taken advantage of her vulnerability, whatever mutual attraction might have existed. "Where are you now?" I asked, softening, my tone slightly. "Singapore. My family is here. I'm staying with my sister while I figure out next steps." She hesitated. "Your children. They must hate me." "My children are remarkably resilient and compassionate," I replied. "They're angry now, understandably. But they don't hate you, Caroline. Their issues are primarily with their father." She was quiet for a moment, You're being kinder than I deserve. Perhaps, I agreed. Or perhaps I simply understand that relationships are complex and that people make desperate choices when they feel cornered. I thought about my own decisions over the past weeks, the strategic moves, the calculated revelations. We're all capable of actions we might once have considered beneath us. What will you do now? She asked softly. I glanced around my study, at the travel guides for Paris on my desk, the blueprints for the lake house renovations, the art supplies I'd recently ordered online. Live my life, I said simply, the one I've been postponing for 30 years. After we ended the call, I sat quietly for a long time, processing the conversation. There was a strange symmetry to it. Two women who had shaped their lives around Gregory's presence, now both moving forward without him at the center. I felt no animosity toward Caroline, just a wistful recognition of patterns repeating across generations. How many women had compromised their authenticity for security, acceptance? Love? The thought crystallized my resolve. The divorce, the cancer surgery, Gregory's potential legal troubles. These were not obstacles to overcome before my real life could begin. They were the very substance of that life, challenges that were helping me rediscover my strength, my preferences. I picked up my phone and texted Claire. Cleared for Paris travel, arriving as scheduled. Have sourced several promising gallery spaces for the new arts program. Ready to begin. Her response came quickly. The apartment awaits, as does excellent champagne. Time to celebrate your renaissance, little sister. Renaissance. The word echoed pleasantly. Not an ending, but a rebirth. Not a diminishment, but an expansion. Outside my study window, the garden I'd tended for decades was preparing for spring's full emergence. Tender green shoots pushed through soil that had seemed dormant just weeks ago. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Life continuing, transforming, finding new expressions after periods of apparent stasis. Tomorrow, I would visit Dr. Patel to discuss radiation scheduling. The day after, I would meet with Samuel Davis to finalize the lake house renovation plans. And in less than 2 weeks, I would board a plane to Paris, to my sister, to the board position, to whatever awaited me in this next chapter. Eleanor Bishop, no longer defined by her husband's name or expectations. Eleanor Bishop, emerging. The thought brought a smile to my face as I closed my laptop and prepared for bed. There would be difficult days ahead, certainly. Medical treatments, legal proceedings, emotional aftershocks. But for perhaps the first time in my adult life, I was facing the future not as someone's wife, mother, or support system, but simply as myself. The discovery felt like stepping into sunlight after a long period of shade, warm, illuminating, and full of possibilities I was only beginning to imagine. Paris in May unfolded before me like a living painting. Every street corner, dripping with chestnut blossoms, every cafe spilling onto sunlit sidewalks. Claire's apartment in the 6th arrondissement overlooked a small square where an elderly accordionist played each morning, the melancholy notes drifting up to the wrought iron balcony where I sipped my coffee, still adjusting to the time difference. You seem different, Claire observed on my 3rd morning, sliding a basket of still warm croissants across the table. At 68, my sister remained striking, her silver hair cut in a sharp bob, her movements deliberate and graceful from decades of yoga practice. More present somehow. I smiled, breaking open a croissant to release its buttery steam. Near-death experiences will do that, whether it's cancer or the death of a marriage. Claire snorted. Your marriage to Gregory was dying for years. You just finally signed the death certificate. She studied me over her espresso cup. The board meeting is tomorrow. Nervous? Surprisingly, no. I glanced down at the square, where a young couple was feeding bits of bread to strutting pigeons. I've spent my life organizing events, managing personalities, crafting environments where others could shine. The skills transfer rather neatly to board governance. And the radiation treatments? You're still planning to start when you return? I nodded. All arranged. Michael will drive me to the first few sessions. Then Rebecca will take over when he travels for work. Ethan's arranged his rotation schedule to cover weekends. I smiled faintly. They're being very thorough in their care coordination. They love you, Claire said simply. And they're probably feeling guilty for not noticing sooner that their father was such a complete bastard. Claire, I chided gently, Gregory is still their father. She waved dismissively. Biology isn't character. Speaking of which, any updates on his legal situation? I sipped my coffee, considering how much to share. Janet called yesterday. The SEC investigation is expanding. They've uncovered evidence of bribes to Singaporean officials, laundered through Kingfisher Holdings. I set down my cup carefully. Gregory may face federal charges. Claire's eyebrows rose. And how do you feel about that? It was a deceptively simple question that I'd been examining since receiving Janet's call. How did I feel about the man I'd spent 3 decades with potentially facing disgrace, financial ruin, even imprisonment? Detached, I answered honestly. As if it's happening to someone I used to know, not the person who shared my bed for 30 years. Claire nodded, unsurprised. That's the gift of betrayal, oddly enough. It severs emotional connections that might otherwise take years to untangle. After breakfast, we walked to the Musée d'Orsay, Claire slowing her usual brisk pace to accommodate my still healing body. The radiation oncologist had cleared me for travel, but cautioned against overexertion. My surgical site was healing well, though occasional twinges reminded me to be cautious with my movements. Inside the museum, we wandered through the Impressionist galleries, pausing longest before Monet's water lilies. The swirling blues and greens captured something I'd been feeling lately, a sense of depth beneath seemingly tranquil surfaces, hidden currents beneath careful composure. I've been thinking about painting again, I confided as we stood before a Degas ballet scene. When the lake house renovations are complete, I'll have a proper studio for the first time since college. Claire smiled. I still have that watercolor you did of Mont Saint-Michel during our semester abroad. It's hanging in my guest bathroom. I laughed. A prestigious gallery placement. Better than being stored in Gregory's attic, which is where I assume the rest of your work ended up. The question, though lightly delivered, struck a nerve. Gregory had indeed been dismissive of my early artistic efforts, suggesting they were charming attempts, but not worth framing or displaying. Over time, I'd stopped creating altogether, channeling my visual sensibilities into curating our home and his office spaces instead. Actually, I have no idea where those student portfolios went, I realized aloud. Probably lost in one of our moves. It doesn't matter. I'm starting fresh now. Claire linked her arm through mine as we moved toward the museum cafe. Starting fresh at 62. I like it. Most people are winding down at our age, not gearing. I've had enough of winding down, I replied. I did that prematurely. That evening, preparing for the board meeting, I stood before the mirror in Claire's guest room, assessing my appearance with newly critical eyes. The conservative navy suit I'd packed suddenly seemed like a costume from my previous life. The dutiful corporate wife dressed to fade elegantly into the background. Without conscious planning, I reached instead for the crimson silk blouse I'd impulsively purchased at a small boutique that afternoon, pairing it with slim black trousers and the silver statement necklace Claire had lent me. The woman reflected. Back appeared both familiar and strange, my face with its gentle lines of experience, but animated by a spark that had been dormant for too long. I touched the subtle curve beneath my blouse where the surgical dressing protected my healing incision. A battle scar of sorts, evidence of survival. The Lawson Foundation's Paris office occupied the top floor of a beautifully preserved Haussmannian building near the opera. As Claire and I approached the imposing entry, she squeezed my hand encouragingly. Remember, Eleanor, you've earned this position through decades of arts patronage and community leadership. You're not here as Gregory Bishop's wife, You're here as yourself. The reminder bolstered my confidence as we rode the ornate elevator to the 6th floor, where Foundation Director Jean-Louis Mercier greeted us warmly. Madame Bishop, what a pleasure to finally meet in person after our many email exchanges. And Claire, lovely as always. He kissed Claire on both cheeks with the familiarity of old friends before ushering us into a conference room where 7 other board members were gathered around an antique mahogany table. Introductions flowed easily as I took my seat. The Swedish gallery owner, the Italian arts administrator, the British philanthropist, the American museum director. Their collective expertise was intimidating, yet their welcome seemed genuine. As discussion began about the Foundation's upcoming grant cycle, I listened attentively, offering observations only when I had something substantive to contribute. We've been considering expanding our youth education initiatives, offered Dominique. Laurent, a former dancer who now ran France's largest performing arts academy. But funding constraints remain an issue. I cleared my throat. If I may, the model we developed in Boston might be adaptable. By partnering with existing community centers rather than creating new infrastructure, we reached more children while keeping overhead minimal. Jean-Louis leaned forward with interest. You have experience with such partnerships? I chaired the Metropolitan Youth Arts Access Program for 6 years, I confirmed. We increased participation by 200% while reducing per-student costs by nearly a third. The conversation shifted with board members asking increasingly specific questions about implementation, metrics, and sustainability. I found myself drawing on decades of volunteer experience, knowledge I'd accumulated while supporting arts organizations in each city where Gregory's career had taken us. What had felt like background activity, secondary to his professional achievements, now emerged as valuable expertise in its own right. By the meeting's end, I'd been appointed to head a working group focused on education outreach, with a particular emphasis on adapting successful models across different cultural contexts. As we gathered our materials, Jean-Louis approached me, privately. Eleanor, your contribution today was exceptional. Claire mentioned you're considering relocating to be closer to family. Should your plans bring you to Paris more permanently, we would be most interested in discussing a more substantial role with the Foundation. The offer caught me by surprise. That's very kind, but my renovation plans in Vermont are already underway. He smiled. Of course. Just know the possibility exists. In my experience, life after major transitions often takes unexpected directions. His words lingered as Claire and I walked back through the gathering twilight, the city's lights beginning to shimmer against the deepening blue sky. Sounds like you made quite an impression, Claire remarked. Jean-Louis doesn't offer positions lightly. I'm not looking for a position, I replied. I'm looking for purpose. There's a difference. She glanced at me sideways. And did today feel purposeful? I considered the question, the energy of the meeting still humming through me. Yes, I admitted. More than I expected. But my life is in Vermont now, or will be, once the renovations are complete. Your life is wherever you decide it is, Claire countered. That's the point of all this, isn't it? Freedom to choose? That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on Claire's balcony wrapped in a soft blanket, watching the city's rooftops silvered by moonlight. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. How did the meeting go? I typed back. Surprisingly well. Was asked to lead education initiative. How are things there? Her response came quickly. Dad appeared at court today for initial hearing. On SEC charges. Looking rough. Michael attended. Said Dad asked about you. Wanted to know when you're returning. I frowned at the screen. Despite the distance and the clear boundaries I'd established, Gregory was still attempting to insert himself into my narrative. I'll be home next Tuesday, I replied. But I won't be seeing Gregory. My focus is radiation treatments and lake house plans. Rebecca sent back a thumbs-up emoji, followed by, proud of you, Mom, for everything. The simple message brought unexpected tears to my eyes. My children's support had been unwavering throughout this tumultuous period, their loyalty, not blind devotion, but a clear-eyed choice to stand with me as I reclaimed my autonomy. It was perhaps the most profound gift I'd received from them, more meaningful than any dutiful holiday bouquet or obligatory Mother's Day brunch. Morning arrived with soft rain tapping against the windows, a gentle percussion accompanying the accordion player who had taken shelter beneath a cafe awning. Claire prepared coffee in the kitchen while I reviewed emails on my laptop at the dining table. Among the usual correspondence was a message from Samuel Davis, the architect overseeing my lake house renovations. Attached were photos showing progress. On the studio space, the north-facing windows now installed, flooding the previously dark boathouse with natural light. The concrete floor had been poured, the walls freshly drywalled. It was still a raw space, but I could visualize the finished room. My easels set up to capture the lake view, shelves lined with art supplies, perhaps a comfortable reading chair in the corner. "Good news?" Claire asked, noting my smile as she set a coffee cup beside me. "The renovation is on schedule," I confirmed, turning the laptop to show her the images. "I should be able to move in by early September." Claire studied the photos thoughtfully. "It's going to be beautiful, but are you sure about living there year-round? Vermont winters can be brutal, especially lakeside." It wasn't the first time she'd raised this concern, and I recognized it as coming from genuine care rather than criticism. "The new heating system is state-of-the-art, and I've arranged for snow removal services. Besides, I've always loved winter, the quiet, the introspection it encourages." What I didn't articulate was my deeper motivation. The lake house represented one of the few spaces in my adult life that had never been shaped by Gregory's preferences or presence. He had tolerated our time there each summer, but always with an undercurrent of impatience, checking his phone for work messages, suggesting we cut our stays short for various business obligations. The property had remained my sanctuary precisely because he had never fully claimed it. "Well, you know you always have a place here," Claire said, gesturing around her apartment. "Whether for visits or longer stays, if you ever need a change of scene." I squeezed her hand gratefully. "I know, and I'll take you up on visits regularly. But I need to establish my independence now, not trade one form of dependency for another." After breakfast, we ventured out despite the drizzle, umbrellas in hand, to explore the neighborhood's small galleries and boutiques. In a tiny shop, tucked behind Saint-Sulpice, I found myself drawn to a display of handcrafted journals bound in soft leather. "For your painting notes," Claire suggested, seeing my interest. "Every artist needs a proper sketchbook." The proprietor, an elderly man with ink-stained fingers, showed us various options, some with watercolor paper, others with unlined pages perfect for pencil sketches. I selected a medium-sized volume with heavy cream paper, its cover a deep teal that reminded me of the lake on clear autumn days. "Pour vos pensées," he said as he wrapped it carefully. "For your thoughts." "Merci," I replied. "J'en ai beaucoup ces jours-ci. I have many these days." He smiled knowingly, adding a pencil to the package. "C'est souvent après les grandes tempêtes que viennent les idées les plus claires." It is often after the greatest storms that the clearest ideas come. How true that was. In the whirlwind of the past months, discovering Gregory's betrayal, confronting my cancer diagnosis, reimagining my future, my thoughts had crystallized with unexpected clarity. Decisions that might once have paralyzed me with indecision now seemed straightforward, my path forward increasingly distinct. That evening, Claire hosted a small dinner party. "Just a few friends who should know you," she explained. The guests included a retired literature professor, a political journalist, an architect specializing in historical preservation, and a ceramicist whose work I'd admired in galleries back home. The conversation flowed easily across topics from urban development to contemporary fiction, each person engaged and engaging without the competitive edge that often characterized Gregory's business dinners. As the night progressed and wine bottles emptied, I found myself in a spirited debate with Bernard, the architect, about adaptive reuse of industrial spaces. His perspectives challenged my thinking, pushing me to articulate my own views more precisely than I'd been accustomed to in social settings where my role had typically been facilitator rather than participant. "You have strong opinions on preservation," he noted with appreciation. "Have you considered consulting? Many American institutions struggle with balancing modernization and historical integrity." I laughed, surprised by the suggestion. "I'm not a professional. Just an enthusiastic observer with too many art history courses in my background." "Professionals begin as enthusiastic observers," he countered. "The difference is simply in claiming one's expertise." Later, as we cleared dessert plates, Claire nudged me gently. "Bernard doesn't offer empty compliments. If he sees potential, in your perspective, it's genuine." I rinsed a wine glass, considering this. It's strange. All these years I've thought of myself primarily in relation to others. Gregory's wife, the children's mother, the firm's hostess. Now suddenly people are responding to me as just me. "Not suddenly," Claire corrected. "You were always there beneath those roles. You just stopped making yourself small enough to fit inside them." That night, I began writing in my new journal, the pencil moving across the cream pages with increasing confidence as I sketched out ideas for the studio space, notes on color combinations I wanted to explore in my painting, reflections on the day's conversations. It felt both foreign and familiar, this act of documenting my own thoughts without filtering them through anyone else's expectations. On my final day in Paris, Claire arranged a surprise, tickets to a small exhibition featuring women artists. Of the École de Paris, painters who had been overshadowed by their male contemporaries during the early 20th century. As we moved through the intimate gallery spaces, I was struck by the persistence revealed in these women's work, their determination to create despite societal constraints, limited recognition, and often complicated personal lives. Before a particularly striking portrait by Marie Laurencin, I paused, captivated by the painter's distinctive style. Her subject rendered in ethereal pastels, yet possessing unmistakable inner strength. "She was involved with Guillaume Apollinaire for years," the gallery guide explained, noticing my interest. "When they separated, critics dismissed her as merely Apollinaire's muse, rather than an artist in her own right. It took decades for her work to be properly appreciated." I studied the painting more closely, noting the subtle technique beneath the seemingly simple composition. How many women's contributions had been similarly diminished, I wondered, their work viewed as auxiliary to the real achievements of the men in their lives. "I've been thinking," I said to Claire as we left the exhibition. "When I return, I want to establish a small foundation of my own. Nothing grand like Lawson, but focused specifically on mid-career women artists who've had to interrupt their creative practices for family obligations." Claire smiled. "Using your divorce settlement to support women finding their second act? Poetic justice." "Not justice," I corrected. "Investment. In possibilities I recognize all too well." My flight home was scheduled for early the next morning. As I packed my suitcase that evening, organizing the new art supplies I'd purchased and wrapping the small ceramics piece I'd bought from Claire's friend, my phone rang. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. "Mom?" Her voice sounded strained. "I know you're coming home tomorrow, but I thought you should know before you land. Dad's been hospitalized." I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly alert. "What happened?" "They're calling it exhaustion and dehydration, but Michael thinks it might have been a panic attack. He collapsed during a meeting with his lawyers yesterday." She hesitated. "They're keeping him for observation because his blood pressure is dangerously high." I processed this information, searching for my emotional response. Concern was there, but distant, the kind one might feel for an acquaintance facing difficulties, not the sharp worry of intimate connection. "I see," I said finally. "Thank you for letting me know. Is he receiving proper care?" "Yes. Michael's been checking in with the doctors since he has privileges at that hospital." She paused. "He's been asking for you, Mom. I told him you're in Paris, but he keeps insisting that you'd want to know, that you'd come if you understood how serious it is." The emotional manipulation was so characteristic of Gregory that I almost smiled. Even from a hospital bed, he was attempting to center himself in my narrative, to reclaim my attention and concern. "Rebecca," I said gently, "I understand you're in a difficult position, but I need you to know that I'm not returning to that dynamic. Gregory has excellent medical care and legal representation. He doesn't need me, regardless of what he claims." Her sigh carried both relief and lingering tension. "I know, it's hard seeing him like this. Despite everything, he's still Dad." "Of course," I acknowledged. "And you can support him as his daughter without expecting me to resume my role as his wife. Those are separate relationships, with different obligations." After we hung up, I finished packing methodically, adding my journal to the carry-on bag I'd take on the plane. Claire appeared in the doorway with a cup of herbal tea. "Everything okay? You look troubled." I accepted the tea gratefully. "Gregory's in the hospital. Exhaustion, apparently, though likely stress-induced given the legal proceedings." Claire's expression hardened. "And he's summoned you to his bedside?" Classic Gregory. "He can summon all he wants," I replied calmly. "I'm not coming." She studied me carefully. "And you're at peace with that decision?" I considered the question, searching for any flicker of doubt or guilt. Finding none, I nodded. "Completely. My radiation treatments begin Thursday. The lake house contractor is meeting me Wednesday to finalize the kitchen plans. My life is moving in a specific direction now, and it doesn't include detours to Gregory's hospital room." Claire smiled with approval. "Well done, little sister." The flight home the next day was smooth, the 8 hours passing in a blend of reading, light dozing, and jotting notes in my new journal. As the plane began its descent toward Boston, I gazed out the window at the familiar coastline emerging from scattered clouds. Despite the pleasant time in Paris, despite Claire's open invitation to consider a more permanent relocation, this landscape still registered as home in some essential way. Rebecca met me at the airport, her warm hug careful around my still healing, surgical site. As we waited for my luggage, she updated me on developments during my absence. Michael's twins had both made the honor roll. Ethan had been offered a prestigious fellowship for the following year, and the first contractors had begun work on weatherproofing the lake house for winter habitation. "And Dad?" I asked, not because I particularly wanted to know, but because addressing it directly seemed healthier than pretending I wasn't aware of his situation. Rebecca's expression tightened slightly. "Released from the hospital this morning. He's staying at Michael's for a few days since his apartment is apparently a mess. His words, not mine." I nodded, accepting this information without comment, as we collected my suitcase and headed toward the parking garage. In the car, Rebecca hesitated before starting the engine. "Mom, I want you to know, none of us expect you to get involved with Dad's situation. Michael offered his guest room because—" She trailed off, searching for words. "Because he's a compassionate person who cares about his father," I finished for her. "As he should. You don't need to justify kindness, Rebecca." She relaxed, visibly. "Thanks. It's just, we're all still finding our way through this new family dynamic. Setting boundaries without severing connections. That's an apt description of the challenge," I agreed, thinking how remarkably mature my children had proven themselves to be throughout this upheaval. "And you're handling it beautifully." As we drove toward home, the house that would not be mine much longer, once the divorce was finalized and the lake house ready, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. The international flight had tired me physically, yet my mind felt alert, already looking ahead to the days that would follow. Radiation treatments, renovation decisions, the beginning of my foundation project. Small, deliberate steps toward the life I was crafting from the raw materials of disruption and change. Rebecca glanced over at me as we neared our exit. "You look different, Mom. Paris agreed with you." I smiled, thinking of Claire's similar observation. It wasn't Paris, though the city certainly has its charms. It's the perspective, I think. Seeing myself through new eyes, not just others' perceptions, but my own as well. She nodded thoughtfully. I get that. Since everything happened with Dad, I've been reassessing my own relationship, asking what I really want versus what I've been conditioned to accept. The parallel hadn't occurred to me before, how my journey might be influencing my daughter's own reflections on partnership and selfhood. The thought that my late-in-life awakening could potentially spare her years of compromise was unexpectedly moving. When we arrived at the house, the emptiness felt different than before. Less like abandonment and more like transition, a space between what had been and what would be. I moved through the rooms with Rebecca, rediscovering my own home after just 10 days away. Everything appeared slightly altered, as if the physical environment had shifted to accommodate my changing perception rather than the other way around. In my study, a stack of mail awaited my attention. Bills, mostly, along with a thick envelope from Diane Thornton. The divorce settlement offer, most likely. I set it aside for tomorrow when my mind would be fresher. Rebecca helped me unpack, exclaiming over the art supplies and the ceramics piece, asking questions about Paris that I was happy to answer. Her presence filled the house with comfortable energy, a reminder that while certain connections had been severed, others remained vibrantly intact. After she left, promising to return the following afternoon to drive me to my first radiation consultation, I stood in the center of my bedroom, suddenly aware of the profound quiet. No sounds of Gregory moving through the house, no need to adjust my schedule around his needs or preferences. Just the gentle ticking of the antique clock that had been my grandmother's, counting moments that were now entirely my own. I unpacked, my new journal and the pencil the Parisian shopkeeper had given me, settling into the reading chair by the window. Outside, twilight was gathering, the familiar neighborhood cloaked in soft shadows. I opened to a fresh page and began to write, my hand moving steadily across the creamy paper. Today marks the beginning, I wrote, not of a new chapter, but of an entirely new book. Summer faded into autumn, the Vermont maples around the lake house erupting into a symphony of crimson and gold that reflected perfectly in the still water each morning. I'd been living at the lake full-time for nearly 2 months now. My radiation treatments completed successfully. My divorce finalized with terms that even Diane had described as remarkably favorable. The renovation had transformed the once seasonal cottage into a comfortable year-round home with efficient heating, expanded kitchen space, and most importantly, my studio in the converted boathouse. On this particular October morning, I sat on the screened porch with my coffee, wrapped in a soft woolen throw against the autumn chill. The mist was just beginning to lift from the lake's surface, revealing a pair of loons gliding silently across the water. My first visitors would be arriving later today, Rebecca and her husband David coming for the weekend, followed by Michael's family on Sunday for an early celebration of my birthday. So much had changed in the 6 months since that fateful family dinner. Yet sitting here in the peaceful morning light, those events seemed to belong to another lifetime entirely. The woman who had stood frozen with a bowl of potatoes in her hands, watching her husband's pregnant assistant claim her place at the table, felt like a distant acquaintance rather than my former self. Movement at the edge of the property caught my attention. A doe and her nearly grown fawn emerged cautiously from the woods, making their way to the water's edge to drink. I remained perfectly still, not wanting to startle them with any sudden motion. There was something profoundly affirming in their presence, life continuing its cycles regardless of human drama, finding nourishment and purpose in the simplest acts of existence. My phone vibrated softly on the side table. A text from Ethan. All set for next weekend. Flight arrives 2:15 Friday. Can't wait to see the studio in person. I smiled, typing back. Looking forward to it. Prepare for full autumn colors and possibly your first snow of the season. Ethan had secured a rare 4-day weekend from his residency program, determined to see the lake house in its autumnal glory before winter settled in. He'd been the most uncertain of my children about my decision to make the seasonal property my permanent home, concerned about isolation and winter access. I suspected this visit was as much about reassuring himself about my well-being as enjoying a brief escape from hospital rotations. Setting down my phone, I returned to watching the deer, who had now been joined by a third, another young one hanging back at the tree line, more cautious than its companions. Family dynamics existed everywhere in nature, I reflected, varying levels of boldness and hesitation, of connection and independence, all within the same small unit. The thought of family inevitably led to Gregory, though not with the emotional jolt such reflections had once triggered. According to Michael, he had moved into a small apartment near the city center, a significant downgrade from both our family home and the luxury pied-à-terre he'd once maintained for his trysts with Caroline. The SEC investigation had resulted in substantial fines rather than criminal charges, leaving him financially diminished but not destitute. The firm had negotiated his early retirement, salvaging what they could of their reputation while distancing themselves from the scandal. Caroline had returned to Singapore permanently, according to the last update I'd received. She had reconnected with her ex-husband, who had apparently had a change of heart about impending fatherhood. I hoped, somewhat abstractly, that she had found stability and perhaps even happiness in that reconciliation. As for Gregory himself, we had not spoken directly since that day in the hospital when he'd attempted to claim my attention from his sickbed. He had tried calling several times in the months that followed, leaving voicemails that evolved from demanding to conciliatory to, finally, reflective. I had listened to each one, acknowledging the emotions they evoked without feeling compelled to respond. His journey was his own now, as mine was mine. The deer eventually retreated back into the forest as the sun rose higher, burning off the last of the morning mist. I gathered my empty coffee cup in the throw, heading inside to prepare for my visitors. The kitchen, now expanded with a wall of windows overlooking the lake, had become my favorite indoor space. I moved through it with easy familiarity, assembling ingredients for the apple cake that had become something of a signature offering for guests. As I worked, my thoughts drifted to the small foundation I had established with a portion of my divorce settlement. We had awarded our first 3 grants the previous month, modest funding for women artists returning to creative practice after extended caregiving interruptions. The joy I'd felt reviewing applications and connecting with these mid-career women had confirmed that this project would be a central focus of my next chapter, not a grand philanthropic gesture, but a targeted effort addressing a need I understood intimately. The cake in the oven, I moved to my studio to squeeze in a few hours of painting before Rebecca and David arrived. The space had exceeded my expectations. Flooded with northern light, the original boathouse's rough-hewn beams preserved as architectural features against the new white walls. 3 easels stood in various positions, each holding work at different stages of completion. I settled before the largest canvas, where I'd been developing a series inspired by the lake's seasonal transformations. This particular piece captured the liminal moment between summer and autumn, the water still holding summer's deep blue while the surrounding foliage began its chromatic shift to fall colors. The interplay of reflection and reality, of past and emerging states, felt like an apt metaphor for my own transition. Painting had returned to me with surprising fluency, as if the creative impulse had simply been dormant rather than extinguished during those decades of nurturing others' ambitions. My technique remained rudimentary in many ways. I had much to relearn and discover, but the process itself provided a satisfaction I'd forgotten was possible. The pure absorption in mixing colors, in applying brush to canvas, in making visible what existed first only in perception. This was a form of presence I had rarely experienced in my former life. 2 hours passed in what felt like moments. Only the oven timer's distant chime pulled me from my concentrated state. I reluctantly cleaned my brushes and returned to the house, where the aroma of baked apples and cinnamon had transformed the kitchen into an autumn sanctuary. As I removed the cake from the oven, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched Rebecca's car pull up, David at the wheel. They emerged, stretching after the 3-hour drive. Rebecca's face breaking into a wide smile when she spotted me through the window. I waved, setting the cake on a cooling rack before going to greet them. "Mom!" Rebecca embraced me warmly. "The place looks amazing. Those new windows are perfect." David hugged me next, then gestured toward the roof. "Solar panels are a great addition. Smart thinking for the winter months." "Samuel's suggestion," I acknowledged, referring to my architect. "Come in. I've just taken a cake out of the oven." Inside, they explored the renovated space with genuine appreciation, exclaiming over the radiant floor heating, the expanded bathroom, the reading nook tucked into what had once been an awkward corner of the living room. Their enthusiasm warmed me, not just because it validated my decisions, but because it signaled their acceptance of this new phase of my life. Over lunch on the porch, Rebecca shared news of her recent promotion at work and David's consideration of a new position that would involve some international travel. "We've been talking about what that might mean for our 5-year plan," she explained, a slight hesitation in her voice, "particularly regarding starting a family." The potential news of grandchildren hung delicately in the air. I recognized the careful way she approached the topic, perhaps uncertain how I might feel about embracing a traditional grandmother role given my recent reclamation of independence. "That sounds exciting," I responded warmly. "Both the promotion and the family planning. You know I'll support whatever timeline works best for both of you." Relief softened her features. "Thanks, Mom. We're not making any immediate decisions, but it's definitely on our horizon." She hesitated. "Would that be strange for you? Becoming a grandmother while you're rebuilding your own life?" I considered her question thoughtfully. Not strange at all. Just another dimension of experience. I smiled, reaching for her hand across the table. "Life doesn't follow linear narratives, Rebecca. We can begin again at any point, and still honor the connections that came before." Later, while David helped adjust the dock for the approaching winter weather, Rebecca asked to see my studio. I led her across the property to the converted boathouse, watching her face as she took in the transformed space. "Mom," she breathed, moving slowly between the easels, studying each canvas with careful attention. "These are beautiful. I had no idea you were this talented." "Neither did I admitted. It's been a process of rediscovery, like excavating. Something that was buried but not lost." She paused before the lake transition painting, her head tilted slightly. "There's something so powerful about this one. The way the light seems to come from within the water rather than just reflecting on the surface." She turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "You know what I just realized? I don't think I've ever seen Dad look at anything you created with this kind of attention. Not your garden, not your dinner parties, certainly not any artistic efforts." The observation caught me off guard with its insight. "Your father appreciated results, not processes," I said carefully. "Unless he was the one engaged in the process." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I've been thinking a lot about what I witnessed growing up. The dynamics between you two that seemed normal because they were all I knew. Now, looking back," she gestured around the studio, "I can see how much of yourself you set aside. I don't want to make the same choices in my own marriage." I moved to stand beside her, both of us facing the painting rather than each other, making the conversation somehow easier. The choices I made weren't wrong for who I was then, Rebecca. I found genuine satisfaction in creating beautiful spaces for our family, in supporting your father's career, in raising you and your brothers. The mistake was in forgetting that those roles weren't the entirety of who I am. Do you regret it? She asked softly. The years with Dad? I considered the question carefully, wanting to offer her truth rather than platitudes. I regret the imbalance, I said finally. The gradual erosion of reciprocity. But no, I don't regret the marriage itself. It gave me you 3 experiences I would never have had otherwise. And ultimately, the contrast needed to recognize what I truly value. She leaned her head against my shoulder briefly, a gesture reminiscent of her childhood. You're kind of amazing, you know that? I laughed, touched by her admiration. I'm simply learning as I go, like everyone else. Now, help me cover these canvases before the evening dampness sets in. The weekend unfolded in gentle rhythms, walks along the lakeshore collecting particularly vivid fallen leaves, board games by the fire when Saturday brought rain, cooking together in the kitchen. I'd designed for exactly such communal preparations. Michael and his family arrived Sunday morning, the twins immediately racing down to the dock despite the chill, their youthful energy invigorating the quiet property. We celebrated my birthday a few days early with a homemade dinner and a cake. Rebecca and the twins had decorated with perhaps more enthusiasm than artistic restraint. Candles were lit, wishes made, photographs taken to send to Ethan and Claire. As I looked around the table at these beloved faces, I felt a profound contentment that had nothing to do with the circumstances of my new life, and everything to do with the enduring connections that had weathered the past year's transformations. After the children were settled into their rooms for the night, the adults gathered on the porch with glasses of wine, blankets draped across laps against the autumn evening's chill. Dad called yesterday, Michael said, breaking a comfortable silence. He wanted to know if we were coming here for your birthday. I kept my expression neutral, waiting for him to continue. He sounded, reflective. Said he'd been seeing a therapist as part of his board-mandated rehabilitation program. Michael swirled the wine in his glass. Apparently, he's been doing some actual introspection about his behavior patterns. Rebecca made a skeptical noise. Let me guess, right around the time the firm slashed his retirement package? Probably, Michael acknowledged. But still, it's something I never thought I'd hear from him. Any admission that he might not have been right about everything. David, who had remained largely neutral throughout the family upheaval, spoke up. People do sometimes change when they lose everything they thought defined them. Not always, but sometimes. He hasn't lost everything, I pointed out gently. He still has his children, his professional achievements, his fundamental capabilities. What he's lost is the specific future he envisioned and the relationship, structures that enabled his worst tendencies. Rebecca studied me curiously. You sound almost compassionate toward him. I can be compassionate without re-engaging, I clarified. Understanding someone's struggles doesn't obligate me to alleviate them. The conversation shifted to other topics, the twins' school activities, David's potential job opportunity, Rebecca's upcoming business trip to Chicago. As the evening progressed and yawns began to punctuate the discussion, we gradually dispersed to our respective rooms. Michael and his wife to the guest suite, Rebecca and David to the newly finished loft space, and me to the main bedroom with its wall of windows facing east to catch the morning sunrise. As I prepared for bed, I noticed a text message from a number I didn't immediately recognize. Opening it revealed a name that made me pause. Leonard Graham. Eleanor. Hope this isn't an intrusion. Claire mentioned you've settled at your lake house and are painting again. I'm in Boston for a conference next month and wondered if you might consider meeting for coffee. No pressure, just an opportunity to reconnect. Leonard. Leonard, the executive I'd helped after the mountain hiking incident with Gregory and Vanessa. We'd exchanged brief pleasantries at an industry event months ago, but hadn't maintained contact. That he would reach out now, that Claire would have mentioned my artistic pursuits to him, stirred a quiet curiosity. I set the phone aside without responding, deciding to sleep on the matter. Unlike my former self, who would have immediately crafted a socially appropriate reply regardless of my actual desires, I had learned to give myself time to determine what I truly wanted before responding to others' requests. Morning arrived with the first dusting of snow across the property, not enough to last, but a gentle harbinger of the winter to come. I rose early, padding quietly through the still-sleeping house to start coffee and watch the sunrise paint, the thin layer of white with pink and gold. The twins would be ecstatic about even this meager snowfall. I could already anticipate their excitement upon waking. As I stood by the window, cradling my coffee mug for warmth, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the humiliation of that family dinner with Caroline in my chair to the peaceful solitude of this snowy morning view, the path had not been direct or easy, but each step had carried me closer to authenticity. I thought about Gregory, somewhere, in his downsized apartment, perhaps also watching this same sunrise. I thought about Caroline and her rekindled relationship, the baby that would have been born by now. I thought about the women receiving grants from my foundation, each reclaiming creative practices long deferred. All of us navigating transitions, rewriting narratives we had once believed fixed and immutable. Later, after a breakfast of pancakes that had the twins bouncing with sugar-fueled energy, I finally responded to Leonard's text. Coffee would be lovely. Let me know when you're in town, and we can coordinate schedules. Simple, straightforward, without excessive explanation or apology. A small exchange that would have been impossible for the woman I was a year ago, bound by obligations to consider everyone's needs before acknowledging my own. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of family activity. A short hike along the lake trail before Michael's family needed to depart, followed by quiet conversation with Rebecca and David before they too began packing for their return journey. As we said our goodbyes in the driveway, Rebecca hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she whispered. "For all of it, the house, the painting, the foundation, but mostly for showing us that it's never too late to become who you really are." Her words stayed with me as I waved them off, remaining in the driveway until their car disappeared around the bend in the road. The property felt different after their departure, not empty as it might have once seemed, but peacefully inhabited by my singular presence. I'd discovered that solitude and loneliness were entirely different experiences. The former could be richly fulfilling when chosen rather than imposed. I returned to my studio as afternoon light began to soften, taking advantage of the remaining hours to work on my lake transition painting. As my brush moved across the canvas, adding depth to the reflected sky and the water, I found myself thinking about the family dinner that had catalyzed this transformation. Caroline sitting in my chair, Gregory's hand on her shoulder, my children's stunned expressions. In an unexpected way, I owed them both a debt of gratitude. Their actions, however selfish and hurtful, had shattered the comfortable illusion I'd maintained about my marriage and my place within it. Without that moment of perfect clarity, seeing myself suddenly as others saw me, a woman so easily displaced, I might never have found the courage to reclaim my own narrative. The thought brought a smile to my face as I stepped back to assess my progress on the canvas. The painting was nearing completion, the interplay of reflection and reality achieving the balance I'd been seeking. Tomorrow, I would begin a new piece, perhaps capturing the first snow against the dark water, the transitional moment between seasons, between what was and what would be. As twilight began to settle across the lake, I covered my paints and cleaned my brushes with practiced movements. Through the studio windows, I could see lights beginning to appear in the few year-round homes dotting the opposite shore, small beacons of human presence in the gathering darkness. Soon, winter would transform this landscape entirely. wrapping, the property in snow and silence. I looked forward to experiencing it fully for the first time, to discovering how the lake house and I would weather the changing season together. Returning to the main house, I lit the fireplace and prepared a simple dinner, content in my solitude, yet connected to the wider world through the day's family interactions, through my foundation work, through the tentative coffee plan with Leonard, through my own creative expression. This balance, between independence and relationship, between self-sufficiency and openness to others, felt like the most valuable discovery of my reinvention. The woman whose chair had been taken at that fateful dinner no longer existed. Her place stood someone new, yet familiar, someone who had always been present beneath the accommodating exterior, someone who understood, finally, that the most important seat at the table was the one she claimed for herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.